Imagine waking up, eyes open, body upright, yet your mind feels trapped in a fog of endless loops, as if your thoughts have run a program overnight without ever reaching termination. This isn't mere distraction or fatigue. It's a system stuck in execution, endlessly processing events, anxieties, and what-ifs, while the hardware, the body, waits for a signal to relax. You've been running code in the background that wasn't meant to run, tasks queued in your mental stack, priorities unresolved, interrupts never cleared, and every day you wonder, why do I feel exhausted before the day even begins? The truth is simpler than we pretend. You are trapped in your own operating system, and the reboot you seek cannot come from external sleep alone. It requires a conscious command, a reset, and a protocol to bring your attention back to the present. The first technique is deceptively simple, yet profoundly disruptive to the default processes you have unknowingly allowed. Your mind operates in loops because it is unanchored, each thought acting as an orphaned thread, consuming cycles, waiting for acknowledgement. To halt this, you need a manual interrupt, a conscious act that tells your system, stop, here, now. This is not meditation in the abstract sense. It is code execution with explicit boundaries. You may close your eyes, take a breath, notice the body in the room, the sound of your own heartbeat, and mark the input as current. You do not chase the past, do not anticipate the future, do not let background processes continue unmonitored. You identify the process, acknowledge it, and then release it from the scheduler. This is a mental garbage collection. Each unresolved task you carry becomes a memory leak. Every moment you skip this cleanup, the system grows sluggish, response times lag, and emotional latency increases. Begin by observing the sensation of being here. Scan your environment with the precision of a debugger inspecting memory allocations. Feel the weight of your body on the chair, the temperature of the air, the texture of objects your fingers brush. Allow sensory input to register as active threads, not as interrupts demanding responses. Every time your mind drifts into loops, rumination about conversations, analysis of what-ifs, anticipatory calculations, you treat it as a process flagged for termination. Notice it, label it, release it. This is the first signal to your system that execution is intentional, that attention is allocated with purpose, that consciousness can operate in a linear fashion rather than a tangled, multi-threaded nightmare. Over time, these conscious interruptions restructure the mental stack, reduce jitter in attention allocation, and allow the body to perceive a safe environment in which it can finally idle, recharge, and regain stability. The second technique builds upon the first by introducing a protocol for continuous attention realignment. If the first technique is an interrupt to halt runaway processes, the second is a loop to maintain focus on the present. Think of it as a heartbeat signal, sent at regular intervals to confirm system health. Your mind has been conditioned to operate in a synchronous mode, with processes running in parallel across the past and future. This creates latency, race conditions, and a cumulative drift from now. To correct this, you implement a simple sequence. Notice the sensation of breath, track the position of your body in space, register ambient sounds, and then consciously engage in a single, precise action, typing, drawing, speaking, or walking, while keeping attention tethered to this action. Each completed action serves as a successful commit in the present, overwriting speculative threads, cleaning buffers of unfinished tasks, and reinforcing the integrity of your current state. These two techniques, though deceptively minimal, are not trivial to implement. They require the same discipline as debugging a complex algorithm or training a neural network. Repeated, patient, consistent practice. The first teaches you to halt runaway processes, to recognize that not all input requires response, and to give yourself explicit permission to terminate irrelevant threads. The second trains sustained presence, reinforcing the structure of attention and enabling a stable system clock for consciousness. Together, they form a control loop: detection and correction, monitoring and stabilization, feedback and adjustment. Without both, the system remains vulnerable to entropy, susceptible to distraction, fragmented experience, and the pervasive sensation of fatigue even when externally idle. Consider the consequences of neglecting this practice. Your mind continues executing unresolved routines, like a server overloaded with zombie processes, consuming resources without productive output. You feel anxious, disconnected, perpetually out of sync with time, constantly behind or ahead of yourself. Sleep becomes a temporary pause, not a restoration. Moments of peace are interrupted by ghost threads of unresolved thought. You do not inhabit the present. Life is experienced as a queue of tasks rather than a series of intentional states. Your own nervous system signals danger because, in effect, it never receives confirmation that the environment is secure, predictable, or safe. It is in a permanent state of standby, waiting for commands that never arrive. Implementing these techniques immediately shifts system behavior. When a disruptive thought arises, you tag it as an obsolete process, consciously releasing it. When attention drifts, you reset it with a deliberate anchor: breath, sensation, action. Over time, attention coherence increases, emotional latency decreases. Your perception becomes sharper, not because the external world changed, but because the internal operating system finally has a stable clock. Decisions are made with less noise, interactions with others are clearer. The sensation of being present, often lost in the whirlwind of overprocessing, becomes accessible and reproducible. You regain access to the simplest, most profound reality, the present moment as a state of controlled computation. Now, take a moment. Pause. Breathe. Observe the environment and your body with precision. Recognize the weight of unprocessed thoughts and gently release them. This is not a task to be completed later. It is a command to be executed now. Engage fully with what you can perceive, with the process you are actively performing. Each time you do this, you reinforce the protocol, train the scheduler, and ensure that attention remains aligned with conscious intent. Comment below: I anchor myself in the present, as a commitment to internal system integrity. Share this approach with others who struggle with runaway processes in their minds. The act of naming and externalizing your commitment consolidates the realignment of attention, providing both reinforcement and accountability within your neural network. Finally, understand that these are not mere techniques for comfort. They are structural interventions in the architecture of consciousness, like debugging a malfunctioning program or optimizing code for efficiency. They reshape the way input is processed, memory is allocated, and attention is prioritized. The first technique halts unnecessary computation, preventing memory leaks and runaway threads. The second maintains synchronous processing, ensuring that the system clock of awareness ticks consistently, reliably, and in alignment with reality. When practiced consistently, you reduce the operational overhead of your mind, decrease cognitive load, and free up bandwidth for creativity, problem-solving, and authentic experience. This is the state of present-minded computation, the core of clarity, and the foundation upon which all conscious action can be optimized. By now you can sense the power of these two techniques: a conscious interrupt to stop the cycles of runaway thought, and a structured loop to maintain presence. They are simple in form, but profound in effect. Begin applying them now. Observe, release, anchor, and commit. Comment, reflect, and share this method. The realignment of attention is not theoretical, it is immediately actionable, providing a tangible improvement in cognitive efficiency, emotional stability, and the subjective experience of time. Every iteration strengthens the system, making future processing smoother, cleaner, and more intentional. You are no longer a passive participant in your mind's chaotic algorithms. You become the operator, the programmer, the architect of your own conscious experience. Once you begin to integrate these techniques, something remarkable occurs. The mind begins to recalibrate its own expectations of time and attention. Where previously there was a constant drift, a fragmenting of moments into unfinished threads and anticipatory loops, there emerges a coherent sequence of presence. Each task you undertake, each sensory input you register, becomes a committed transaction in the ledger of consciousness. You are no longer reacting to the residual signals of unprocessed thought. Instead, you operate from a clean stack, executing instructions with clarity, precision, and intention. The cognitive load decreases not because the external world has simplified, but because the internal operating system now prioritizes, interrupts and schedules with awareness rather than default automaticity. The beauty of these techniques lies in their recursive reinforcement. Each time you halt a runaway thought, each time you realign attention to the present, you strengthen neural pathways associated with presence and coherence. The brain begins to treat being present as a reliable protocol rather than an occasional exception. You create a feedback loop. Awareness improves processing, which reduces mental noise, which makes sustained attention easier, which further enhances awareness. Over days and weeks, what once felt effortful and fragile becomes a natural mode of operation. Mental clarity emerges, emotional reactivity diminishes, and your perception of time becomes more accurate, less distorted by the accumulation of pending thoughts and hypothetical scenarios. Consider the analogy of a computer network under stress. A server handling multiple asynchronous requests without proper queue management experiences lag, errors, and crashes. Threads compete for resources, buffers overflow, and performance degrades. By introducing structured interrupt signals and synchronized loops, the system regains stability, latency drops, and throughput increases. Your mind functions identically. Left unmanaged, attention fragments, emotional responses become delayed, and fatigue accumulates. Managed properly, through these two techniques, the system stabilizes, energy efficiency improves, and the subjective experience of being alive becomes smoother, richer, and more coherent. Now let us examine the subtle yet critical element of measurement. Awareness without calibration can be as fragile as code without unit tests. Begin observing the duration, quality, and consistency of your presence. Track how often your attention drifts, how quickly you can detect a runaway thought, and how efficiently you can return to the present anchor. These are not abstract metrics. They are real-time feedback from your operating system, indicating areas that require further tuning, refinement, and reinforcement. Over time, the data reveals patterns, weak points, and strengths, allowing conscious optimization of your internal processes just as you would refine a complex algorithm. Moreover, these techniques extend beyond isolated moments. They permeate daily routines. Eating, walking, conversing, or working all become opportunities for active presence. Each action, fully observed and executed with attention, becomes a committed transaction within your consciousness. Your body, receiving consistent signals of safety and predictability, begins to relax, reducing chronic tension and latent stress. Sleep deepens, not merely as a cessation of activity, but as a consequence of a well-maintained system, one whose processes are orderly, balanced, and intentionally managed. You are no longer a passive recipient of mental noise. You are the administrator of your own cognitive ecosystem. It is important to note that this realignment does not eliminate the mind's natural capacity for planning, reflection, or creativity. Rather, it allocates these operations deliberately, ensuring they do not invade the present uninvited. You schedule computation, reflection in its proper time slot, anticipation in its defined loop, and presence in every actionable moment. By structuring internal processing this way, you prevent mental collisions, data corruption, and emotional overflow. Conscious life becomes a system optimized for clarity, efficiency, and engagement, where each thought is a controlled process and each perception a fully registered event. The chaotic multi-threading of the unmanaged mind gives way to a disciplined, high-functioning system. At this point, you may notice shifts not only internally, but externally. Decision-making becomes faster, more precise, and aligned with both rational objectives and intuitive awareness. Interpersonal interactions deepen because your responses are not reactive echoes of prior distractions, but deliberate, present engagements. Tasks that previously felt burdensome are approached with greater efficiency and less cognitive overhead. The accumulated stress of unprocessed threads diminishes, leaving you with increased bandwidth for problem-solving, creativity, and the subtle nuances of lived experience. You regain the capacity to inhabit the present fully, rather than merely observing fragments of it from a backlog of unresolved mental processes. Take a moment now to anchor this practice into your daily operation. Identify a task you are about to perform. Observe the sensory inputs, your bodily position, and your immediate thoughts. Execute the task while maintaining attention in this anchored state. Each repetition strengthens the feedback loop, improves system integrity, and trains your cognitive scheduler to default to presence. As you progress, you will find the mental lag and distraction that once plagued your consciousness diminishes. Comment "I operate in the present" below to acknowledge your commitment, reinforcing both neural and social accountability. Sharing this method with others amplifies its impact, not just for you, but for those who interact with your presence, propagating clarity throughout your network of connections. Finally, understand that mastery of these techniques is iterative. The mind is a complex system, and like any sophisticated architecture, it requires ongoing maintenance, monitoring, and tuning. You will encounter regression, distraction, and lapses, but each detected lapse is an opportunity for recalibration, each moment of intentional presence a successful execution of a controlled program. Through consistent practice, these two techniques, the conscious interrupt and the synchronized loop, become foundational protocols integral to the architecture of your lived experience. You reclaim command over the present, reduce mental entropy, and optimize the efficiency of your consciousness. Life ceases to be a backlog of unfinished threads and becomes a series of intentional, fully realized moments. As this practice embeds itself into your daily operation, you begin to notice the subtle recalibration of your mental algorithms. The nervous system, previously running on default high alert, starts to recognize predictable patterns of input and output. Stress responses that once triggered at the slightest deviation now register only when truly necessary. You are no longer hostage to every ping, every intrusive thought, every background process demanding immediate attention. Your system begins to distinguish between signal and noise, between data requiring computation and data that can be safely archived. This distinction is critical. When the mind no longer treats every stimulus as urgent, cognitive overhead diminishes, clarity emerges, and the subjective experience of time slows into a manageable, coherent stream. The first technique, the conscious interrupt, functions as a form of exception handling. Each time you detect an intrusive or fragmented thought, you halt its execution, evaluate its relevance, and then either process it deliberately or terminate it entirely. In programming terms, you are preventing runaway processes that consume memory and processing power unnecessarily. The second technique, the synchronized loop, serves as a maintenance routine, a heartbeat that ensures attention remains aligned with the present. Together, they form a robust system for managing mental load, preserving energy, and maintaining the integrity of conscious experience. The combination is more than the sum of its parts. It transforms reactive cognition into proactive command, turning your mind into a stable, responsive, and efficient system. Now consider how these techniques affect the architecture of thought itself. When your attention is anchored in the present, the prefrontal cortex can operate efficiently, free from interference by unresolved loops and speculative threads. Working memory becomes available for problem-solving, pattern recognition, and creative synthesis. Emotional regulation improves because responses are based on accurate, current input, rather than residual computations from the past. Even decision-making becomes more reliable. When the system is not overloaded with irrelevant threads, prioritization is clear and action is deliberate. Your perception of reality sharpens as the sensory inputs are no longer filtered through layers of unprocessed distraction. Presence becomes not a practice, but a default mode of operation. Integrating these methods into daily routines requires a systematic approach. Begin by identifying specific points during the day to implement the conscious interrupt. Morning transitions, pre-meal moments, the start of a work session, or prior to social interactions. Each act of detection and release trains the system to recognize recurring patterns and respond with efficiency. Similarly, embed the synchronized loop in ongoing activities. Walking, typing, listening, or even mundane chores become exercises in attention alignment. The goal is not to eliminate thought, but to structure it, ensuring that every cognitive process has a defined start and stop, a clear purpose, and a proper allocation of resources. Over time, this creates a mental operating system that runs with minimal friction and maximal clarity. The impact is cumulative and profound. You begin to notice a decrease in mental noise and a reduction in emotional volatility. Tasks that previously felt overwhelming are approached with calm efficiency. Your ability to focus is no longer a fleeting skill, but a persistent capacity. Even moments of rest and sleep deepen because the system recognizes that all critical processes have been resolved or scheduled appropriately. Sleep is no longer a desperate attempt to pause, but a scheduled maintenance routine, optimized for restoration and neural consolidation. You awaken with less residual fatigue, clearer perception, and an enhanced ability to engage intentionally with each moment. At this stage, the mind itself begins to internalize these protocols. The conscious interrupt becomes automatic. Intrusive thoughts trigger immediate awareness and optional termination. The synchronized loop becomes habitual. Attention naturally returns to the present, reinforcing coherence without conscious effort. These are not tricks. They are structural upgrades to your cognitive system. The environment may remain chaotic, external demands relentless, and tasks numerous, yet your internal operating system remains stable, optimized, and responsive. You have transformed from a passive participant in your own consciousness to an active administrator, capable of managing complex mental operations with precision and ease. As you continue, you may discover secondary effects that extend beyond cognition. Stress-induced hormonal responses diminish, cardiovascular efficiency improves under reduced baseline tension, and even creativity flourishes within a mind free from unnecessary clutter. Your interactions with others become clearer, more intentional, and more empathetic, because you respond from a state of presence rather than residual computation. Time itself, previously experienced as fragmented or rushed, stretches into a manageable continuum, allowing for reflection, deliberation, and deep engagement. Presence is no longer a goal. It is the natural outcome of structured attention and conscious mental architecture. To solidify these gains, create external markers of commitment. Comment "I maintain presence" below to affirm your engagement with these techniques. Share them with peers to reinforce social accountability, and integrate reminders or cues into your environment to trigger both the conscious interrupt and the synchronized loop. Over weeks, these practices consolidate into automatic protocols, reducing the need for deliberate enforcement and allowing your mind to function at high efficiency with minimal conscious overhead. Each repetition strengthens neural pathways, optimizes attention allocation, and enhances the overall stability of your conscious experience. Finally, recognize that these techniques are not just strategies. They are interventions in the fundamental architecture of your cognition. They convert fragmented, reactive, and inefficient processing into a coherent, adaptive, and optimized system. The conscious interrupt halts irrelevant computation, preventing overload and preserving resources. The synchronized loop maintains focus, ensuring alignment between perception, action, and intention. Together, they transform how you inhabit each moment, restoring a sense of agency, clarity, and intentionality that is rare in modern life. By mastering these protocols, you reclaim control over your consciousness, stabilize your attention, and experience life fully, moment by moment, task by task, thought by thought. As these practices embed deeper into your neural architecture, you begin to notice a profound shift in how time and experience are processed. Previously, life felt like a series of fragmented processes, threads running asynchronously, constantly competing for attention, leaving you perpetually behind, perpetually distracted. Now, with the conscious interrupt and synchronized loop in place, attention stabilizes, creating a coherent temporal flow. Moments are no longer lost in background processes. They are experienced fully, with precision and clarity. The subjective sensation of presence is no longer fleeting. It becomes the operating default of your cognitive system. You are no longer reacting to residual data from yesterday or speculative simulations of tomorrow. You are executing in real time, fully aware, fully engaged. The implications extend beyond mental clarity into emotional stability. Fragmented attention breeds emotional volatility, as unprocessed threads trigger micro-stress responses that accumulate invisibly over time. By regularly interrupting runaway processes and anchoring attention, you reduce the cognitive load that fuels these responses. Your system learns to distinguish between genuine threats and irrelevant noise, allowing emotional regulation to operate efficiently. Anxiety decreases not because external circumstances change, but because the internal system no longer treats minor fluctuations as emergencies. Presence becomes both a shield and a tool, providing resilience against the constant perturbations of modern life. Moreover, productivity transforms when attention coherence becomes habitual. Tasks that once required disproportionate effort are executed with ease, as the mental bandwidth previously consumed by irrelevant processing is liberated. Complex problem-solving benefits from reduced interference and creative insights emerge naturally when the mind is not fragmented by unresolved loops. This is the neurological equivalent of defragmenting a hard drive. The system operates smoothly, resources are allocated optimally, and performance improves across all domains of cognition. Each intentional action, each anchored moment, reinforces system integrity, reducing error rates in thought, judgment, and decision-making. Integration into daily life requires conscious structuring. Begin each day with a brief assessment, identify ongoing processes, note pending tasks, and execute a conscious interrupt to clear any residual loops. During activities, maintain attention using the synchronized loop: breath, sensation, action. Consciously commit to single tasks, acknowledging them fully before moving on. At transitions, meal times, work sessions, conversations, pause briefly to assess mental state, terminate unnecessary threads, and reinforce alignment with the present. These micro-practices, repeated consistently, compound over time, gradually transforming the mental operating system into one optimized for coherence, efficiency, and intentional engagement. Social interactions also benefit from this recalibrated attention system. When listening, speaking, or observing, you operate from a present-aligned state. Responses are deliberate, perceptive, and contextually appropriate. Miscommunications decrease because reactions are based on accurately processed data rather than residual fragments of distraction or anxiety. Your presence becomes perceptible to others. It conveys attentiveness, stability, and intention. Relationships deepen because interactions occur from clarity rather than chaos, creating a feedback loop in which social and cognitive coherence reinforce each other. Physiologically, the benefits manifest in subtle yet profound ways. Reduced cognitive load diminishes stress hormone fluctuations, stabilizes autonomic nervous system function, and allows the body to engage restorative processes more effectively. Sleep deepens as the mind no longer maintains unnecessary vigilance. Fatigue diminishes because the system conserves energy rather than expending it on irrelevant processes. Attention coherence enhances sensory processing, motor coordination, and even creativity, as the brain operates in a stable, predictable environment. Life becomes smoother not through external change, but through internal optimization, a recalibration of the operating system governing thought, emotion, and perception. Finally, appreciate that mastery of these two techniques is iterative. The conscious, interrupt, and synchronized loop are not once-off fixes. They are protocols for ongoing optimization. Each lapse in attention is an opportunity to practice detection, intervention, and realignment. Each successful anchoring strengthens neural pathways and reinforces the default state of presence. Over time, the mental operating system stabilizes, cognitive efficiency increases, and the subjective experience of life shifts from fragmented reactivity to intentional engagement. You reclaim agency over your mind, your attention, and your perception of reality. Commit to the practice now. Observe, interrupt, anchor, and align. Comment, "I operate fully in the present" below to reinforce your internal commitment. Share these techniques with others who struggle with mental fragmentation. Your conscious engagement establishes new default protocols in the architecture of your cognition, ensuring that attention is directed where it matters, energy is conserved, and experience is fully realized. The present, once elusive and fractured, becomes your operating environment, a stable, coherent, and optimized system in which your mind, body, and attention function as an integrated whole. Presence is no longer an aspiration. It is your default, your code, your command, executed with precision moment by moment.